Good morning and welcome to the WAVY Digital Desk. Oh, sorry, good afternoon. The morning has just flown by, I guess, as we're, going through all of the political coverage that seems to be updated every minute. Last time that I spoke with Jesse Richman from ODU, we were talking about what was going to happen going into February. So obviously a few weeks later, we're getting that fresh update and that look before Virginia goes to the polls next week. I know that some of you may have already early voted, but this is an opportunity on Super Tuesday to see where a whole bunch of the delegates are going to go. I'm going to bring on Jesse Richman from ODU, Associate Professor of Political Science and International Studies. He's joined us before, so we're going to welcome him back. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us again on these updates, headed into our election next week.
Great to be here.
I just wanted to start, last time we spoke, the big question mark was, is Nikki Haley going to continue her campaign up through Super Tuesday? And we were waiting to see what was going to happen in South Carolina because she said that was her next target, really. That's what she was talking about. Now, of course, we know from over the weekend that she's actually saying, nope, I'm going to keep going, till after South Carolina, and she is in Michigan now. I just want to see, do you have any top thoughts really from the last time, at least in terms of Nikki Haley and this sort of continuance of her campaign?
So Nikki Haley's the last serious opponent to Donald Trump standing in the Republican primary, and she's had some money flow into her campaign, so she's had resources. She has not been able to translate those resources into winning any primaries at this point. And so South Carolina was the most recent. Haley, although it's her home state, although she was governor there, lost by about 20 percentage points. And so this is the last of a series of losses. She's heading into Michigan, where her polling doesn't look very good. And then about a week from tomorrow, we have the Super Tuesday primaries, which are a huge collection of states voting, including Virginia, about a third of the overall delegates awarded. And so this is a critical time period for Haley. For her to continue the campaign past Super Tuesday, I think she has to win some states. She has to really accumulate some delegates. If that happens, she might continue the campaign. Otherwise, we're probably looking at roughly the last week of the Haley campaign right now.
And I looked at the numbers, at least in terms of delegates, just so people are aware, going into this. And I don't know if they count in South Carolina yet, but Trump was at about 110 delegates and Haley is about 20. So there's quite a difference there.
That's right. And so as you can see from those delegate counts, you don't have to win to get some delegates in a number of these contests. And so Haley has managed to accumulate some delegates, but not very many compared to Trump. And we're still early days in terms of the delegate counts, much more about momentum and about the narrative and so forth, but none of that looks good for Haley either. So it's really challenging. If you're a Haley supporter, if you don't want, a lot of people in the polling say they don't want a Trump-Biden matchup. Super Tuesday is really the last chance for the people who don't want a Republican Donald Trump versus a Democrat Joe Biden to change that. If that doesn't change with Super Tuesday, with a surprisingly good performance for Haley, we're going to be looking at a Trump-Biden rematch in the 2024 presidential election.
And tomorrow with Michigan, where is that leaning? How is that looking, I guess, going into tomorrow? Because that's really a big one, before we get to next week.
Yeah, so Michigan, what polling has been done suggests Trump has a huge lead. It's about 75-25, that sort of magnitude. So similar to what we're seeing in some of the national polling. And if that holds, that doesn't help Haley at all. If Haley, however, has a really surprisingly good performance, and there hasn't been very much polling, so it's possible that the polling that there is an error, then that potentially resets things a little bit for the Haley campaign. She needs to do surprisingly well, I think, in Michigan to help revise a narrative which is currently not looking good for her in terms of this decline of her campaign relative to Donald Trump. The inability to beat Trump, even in her home state, doesn't help.
Right. And I know that she was waiting for that sort of local support, although we had seen that, other government officials, obviously in South Carolina, had supported Trump, which was interesting. So we sort of knew that going in. I did want to say, the big update too, the Koch brothers had pulled their funding, for her. So I mean, where does that stand? You know, that is a huge donor, obviously, in supporting her that has now dropped out. So is that just a sign of its own?
I think that's just a sign of analysts in the Koch brothers network. Again, this is a PAC that was spending outside money in support of Haley. Their judgment, I think, was that there really wasn't a path forward for Haley at this point. And so, although they said they still wish her the best, they don't think their support can make much difference in the next stretch. And I think reading between the lines only slightly, what that's saying is we don't think there's any path for Nikki Haley to win. We're going to cut our losses and focus elsewhere on campaigns where we think we can make a difference.
And going into next week, Trump was saying, you know, by Nikki Haley continuing, he doesn't think she knows how to get out of this, is some sort of phrase that he's repeated. Do you think there is truth to that and sort of how campaign finance and campaign sort of plans go, that maybe she's just trying to figure out what an out point would be?
Well, I think Super Tuesday is a natural point to end. Haley's best hope is for independents and even some Democrats to cross party lines and vote in open primary states. So in Virginia, for instance, there really isn't any party registration. People can choose when they show up at election day which primary to vote for. Haley's best hope is that lots of people do that in the open primary states on Super Tuesday, and that gives her campaign a boost. And so she's staying in to see how that plays out. The polls in the primaries have so far been quite accurate in terms of Trump's vote share, but consistently maybe overstating Trump's support by about 1%. That's not enough difference in terms of the polls versus the outcomes for Haley to have much realistic chance heading into Super Tuesday, unless something really surprising happens, unless her campaign really catches fire, or unless voters start factoring in the issues and indictments with Donald Trump in a different way than Republican primary voters seem to be factoring them in so far.
And I know Virginia is an interesting state in terms of voting. You know, people call it a bellwether state. People have, you know, sort of looked at it, you know, as the last presidential elections and then gubernatorial elections went on to sort of see what's going to happen. Is Virginia questionable in terms of if they're very pro-Trump or, you know, pro-Haley? Are there any sort of thoughts on that sort of going into that primary?
I think Virginia is a relatively promising state for Haley compared to some. If you look at where Haley's been able to win, it's mostly been in the higher income, more educated parts of states. And Virginia as a whole is a relatively high income, relatively high education level state compared to some of the other states that have been part of this contest so far. And so that arguably makes it more favorable for Haley. Within bounds, though, if you look at the overall polling, it doesn't look favorable enough to really set her on a path towards victory, but we'll see. Maybe she'll do surprisingly well.
Right. And then, you know, the other part you talked about last time in sort of our up to elections coverage was the third party candidate. And we've seen, you know, coverage in the last week or so on, you know, national and local platforms about how Robert Kennedy Jr., you know, where is he going to sort of sit in all of this? And if he's taking votes from, is it either Biden or Trump? We've heard a lot of people say, you know, he's taking what would be Biden votes. Is there any truth to that statement?
There's a little bit of truth to it, probably not quite as much as one would expect, given the way that the Kennedy family name is kind of a storied name in Democratic circles. If you look at the polling with all of the possible candidates versus just the Trump-Biden polling, the Trump is currently in the Real Clear Politics average up by 2 percentage points against Biden in the two-candidate polling, and up by 3 percentage points in the 3, 4, 5 candidate polling. And so that suggests, yes, there's a little small degree to which the additional candidates hurt Biden more than Trump. It's only a modest margin, though. We're talking about a difference of about a percentage point. Now, in any given poll, a percentage point is within the margin of error. It's certainly within the margin of the sort of systemic biases we've seen in polls in recent years. And so now it suggests that, yes, it hurts Biden a little bit relative to Trump, but only to a small degree, not maybe as much as one would expect, given that arguably all of the candidates who are on that 5 candidate version of the ballot, on the 3 candidate, right? Everybody except for Trump is arguably more in a position to pull from the Democrats, you might think. So it doesn't make as much difference as one might expect.
And we talked about this last time as well, so I just wanted to update, a few weeks later, but we talked about how the federal government decisions and international relations right now are sort of obviously going to impact Biden and not Trump, as he's not president right now. But where does that sit right now when we're talking, so many hot topic issues of spending and government spending in Ukraine and on the Israel-Hamas war? How much do you think that's sort of going to impact people right now in terms of, even just Biden's like favorability?
Well, I think it's probably one of the things that's weighing on Biden's favorability. You heard Trump at his CPAC speech over the weekend making the argument that uh, under Trump there was peace, under Biden there are all of these wars, and Trump's claiming uh, whether there's a basis for this or not, it's something he's going to keep repeating through the campaign, claiming that this reflects his great skill as a leader versus Biden's incompetence. Now that argument, I think Biden's going to be have some potent rejoinders to that, but it's an argument that is certainly going to be part of this campaign. Trump is looking for where the points of weaknesses are in Biden's uh, position. If you look at the economy, in some ways, the economy is a point of strength for Biden. It's grown well, unemployment low, employment up. On the other hand, there's inflation, and Trump will try to target that. Then immigration obviously is another thing that Trump is trying to target very, very heavily, to such an extent that you had Trump's allies in Congress back out of what they'd previously been trying to force Biden and the Democrats to accept, a deal to increase security on the southern border, because this was seen as an issue that they wanted to keep viable for the campaign. So there's a very that's certainly going to be one of the issues. And then foreign policy more broadly, the war in Ukraine, the war with Hamas and Israel and so forth, that's all going to be part of an argument around who's better positioned to deal with foreign policy issues and challenges.
And we know what happened in 2016. There was a lot of calls about interference, specifically Russian interference in, the Democratic campaigns. Now, I just wonder, Senator Warner just said, in the last week that he's worried about this, as we've heard, Putin make comments about the election and which president he'd rather be in office. And you've heard other things. You've heard about scam robocalls, calling constituents for Biden. What do you make about all of this sort of external noise that's sort of happening?
Well, I think that let's pull different pieces of this out. One aspect of this is, I think as voters, all of us need to be increasingly cognizant of the ways AI is making it ever easier to fake things. So we had the robocalls sounding like Biden in New Hampshire, and those have ultimately been traced back to someone connected with the campaign of one of Biden's Democratic opponents in New Hampshire. The technology continues to make it easier to fake things. Sometimes those fakes are kind of cute. A while ago, there was something going the rounds on various social media platforms of these AI faked images of Joe Biden and Donald Trump harmoniously having a picnic together and other sorts of things, right? You can fake sort of cute things, but you can also fake things that aren't so cute. And so as voters, we have to be really careful about that. It increases the challenges of figuring out what's real and what's not in the campaign environment. Now, foreign actors interference. So I would expect the United States election is usually consequential for the world, and there are real divisions in U.S. politics over foreign policy. Trump and Biden represent different visions for the way the U.S. will conduct itself in world affairs, and so various people and leaders and governments around the world, I think, will try to influence what happens. And that can take a variety of forms. Biden, Putin claims that Biden is his preference to win the election. Is that real or not? Is it an effort to boost Trump? In fact, that's probably just the beginning of the arguments over who is what foreign leaders are backing what candidates, and we'll see what kinds of efforts are undertaken, whether we have efforts to use advertising and other tools to manipulate the political discussion in the United States in this election, other sorts of strategies. I'd expect there'll be some of that that gets tried as this process goes forward.
And I know that we're about out of time, so I did want to ask, going into next week for Virginia voters, you talked about, this is your opportunity to choose, right? So I think that's a big point that you make. But is there any other sort of thoughts or analysis, going into next week for Virginia voters that really people should keep an eye on?
Well, so voting is a great privilege, and it's a wonderful thing to do. It's our chance as voters to have our say. And I think especially in the Republican primary next Tuesday, there is a real choice. There are quite sharp contrasting visions between Trump and Haley on a number of issues. And so it's a chance for the Republican primary elected in Virginia to make a choice. And that choice will have enormous consequence. If Haley wins a number of states, Haley probably continues the campaign. If Haley doesn't, Haley will probably end that campaign. And so whether you're a Haley supporter or a Trump supporter, it's your chance to express your opinion and help shape the way American politics proceeds over the next several months.
Well, Jesse, thank you so much for joining us today, and speaking about the election as we've gotten, weekly updates and changes sort of and what's going to happen. And I know that we'll probably follow up when it seems shortly soon we could know who really are the general election candidates.
Looking forward to that.
Well, thank you all for watching. There's more information on WAVY.com. You can also figure out what is on the ballot and exactly what it looks like as you head into next week. So thank you so much again for joining us today.
Happy to be here.